All right. Zechariah 9. Let's get into it. So every chapter so far we've had Zechariah having some sort of vision, or he's woken up, and a lot of pretty much everything has to do with the temple and New Jerusalem and the garden returning. So we'll keep those thoughts in mind as we reread here. So chapter 9, the oracle of the word of the Lord is against the land of Hadrach, and Damascus is its resting place. And I will pay attention for notes I have. We'll just stop as we go instead of reading everything and heading back. So Hadrach, you could read the note here, is well known from Assyrian sources as Hadrachia, the city over which Zechariah was king. And though it is otherwise absent from the biblical record, Damascus is an important administrative center in the Persian Empire. It has been the administrative center of the Persian satrapy, of which Jerusalem was a part. Both Hadrach and Damascus are in the Persian satrapy of Anabarnahara, meaning across the river, which was bordered on the east by the Syrian desert and stretched from the eastern Sinai and the Gulf of Aqaba up through Syria to the west bank of the Euphrates, thus roughly covering the area of the empire of David and Solomon from earlier times. So first we see Damascus in the land of Hadrach, which isn't really mentioned much in the Bible, it's saying. And then all these other cities seem to be Philistine cities. So it's interesting that this one is more, the Syrians. But it kind of reminds us that, from the north, that's where the Battle of Armageddon will take place. And it's possible that this is hinting at that if we're going to go really prophetic with this. But as far as just judgment, it could have been as in the context of even Alexander the Great coming through and conquering many of these cities. We got a little note here. Let's see. This is from me watching Brute Corman's videos, and he was saying Hadrach might be a person. The name means hard and soft, which is kind of a contradiction, but it's based on Yahweh's nature, and it's based on his nature is based on what we do with his word. If we obey it and we're doing his word, then we will receive blessing. If we don't, we receive curses. It's simple as that. So he's saying it's an individual or a person or a messianic figure. I don't really see that in the context, but I thought it was an interesting thought. So let's continue on reading. For the Lord has an eye on mankind and on all the tribes of Israel, and on Hamath, which borders on it, Tyre and Sidon. Though they are wise, Tyre has built herself a rampart and heaped up silver like dust and fine gold like the mud of the streets. And behold, the Lord will strip her of her possessions and strike down her power on the sea, and she shall be devoured by fire. So most of these Philistine cities are mentioned. They're on the coastline of the Mediterranean Sea. So they were seafaring and kind of like almost pirates, I guess, because they, at this time in Zechariah, we have Zerubbabel and Joshua the high priest rebuilding the temple. They probably received a lot of grief from these surrounding Philistine cities. Jerusalem was unwalled, and the people were generally unprotected. And dealing with this for a good 100 years, even up until the time of Nehemiah and Ezra, because they were having to, build with one hand and sword in the other one, just keep the construction going. So I'm sure they were halting any type of construction with the temple and just being jerks like they've been ever since for the good past, since Solomon, a good 500 years, right? Or more. So, Lord will strip her of possession, strike her down in the power of the sea, and she will be devoured by fire. And I was thinking about these cities being destroyed by fire and why they're kind of getting singled out instead of, why isn't the Persian Empire getting singled out? And again, the Persian Empire was kind of a peace period, like we've talked about before. They allowed the Jews to return to the land. Of course, bad things happened, but these are really the aggressors here, these cities in this context. And in the future context, we kind of know, based on Joel 2, which we'll look at here, is that the land's going to get wiped out by fire. And it makes sense that the land would have to be cleansed in order for his bride, the New Jerusalem, to come down. And we see a couple references to this New Jerusalem in this chapter, and we've seen it several times through Zechariah. So let's just quickly read Zechariah or Joel 2 here. If I can find it. All right. So blow the shofar in Zion, sound the alarm on my holy mountain. Let all living in the land tremble. So the holy mountain could either be Jerusalem or the place where the New Jerusalem will come down. For the day of Adonai is coming. The day of the Lord is upon us. The day of darkness and gloom, the day of clouds and thick fog. Great and mighty horde is spreading like blackness over the mountains. There has never been anything like it, nor will there ever be again, not even after the years of many generations. Ahead of them a fire devours, behind them a flame consumes. Ahead the land is like the Garden of Eden, behind them a desert waste. From them there is no escape. They look like horses, and like cavalry they charge. The rumble like that of chariots, they leap over the mountains. They like crackling flames devouring stubble, like a mighty horde in battle array. At their presence the peoples writhe in anguish. Every face is strained of color. Like warriors they charge, they scale the walls like soldiers. Each one keeps to his own course without getting in the other's way. They don't jostle each other, but stay on their own paths. They burst through defenses unharmed, without even breaking rank. They rush into the city, they run along the wall, they climb up into the houses, entering like a thief through the windows. At their advance the earth quakes, and the sky shakes, and the sun and the moon turn black, and the stars stop shining. Adonai shouts orders to his forces. His army is immense, mighty, and it does what he says. For great is the day of Adonai, fearsome, terrifying. Who can endure it? So we see this is a destruction coming upon the land, wiping everything out with fire. And people come with different conclusions on this, because 11 kind of throws you for a loop there. It's like Adonai shouts his orders to his forces. Well, this is his army, but at the same point it reminds us of the locust army. And either way, I think this is an army of angels of some sort. Whether they are good or bad, they are doing God's will, and the land is being cleansed with fire. The world was already destroyed by a flood, so now this land is being cleansed with fire to make way, purified, refined, so New Jerusalem can come down. So let's keep reading, now that I've confused everyone. But behold, the Lord will strip her of her possessions and strike down her power on the sea, and she shall be destroyed by fire. Ashkelon shall see it and be afraid, Gaza too, and shall writhe in anguish, and Ekron also, because its hopes are confounded, and the king shall perish from Gaza. Ashkelon shall be uninhabited. A mixed people shall dwell in Ashdod, and I will cut off the pride of Philistia. I will take away its blood from its mouth, and its abominations from its teeth, and it too shall be a remnant for our God, and it shall be like a clan in Judah, and Ekron shall be like the Jebusites. Now, this is all very interesting. I've read a couple different versions on this. Some will say they will stop eating meat with blood in it, and they will remove unclean food from their mouths. So it's kind of interesting because it's obviously talking about eating unclean food or not obeying the laws of the Torah when it comes to eating food. And you're like, why is that so important to deserve this kind of crazy destruction that's going to be happening? And there's obviously going to be a remnant here. They shall join to Judah, and Ekron shall be like the Jebusites. And the Jebusites were and I read a few things that they even had some connections with Abraham, and when they sold him the cave where he would be buried, that they made him promise that they wouldn't destroy them, because he knew that his people, his children, would come back one day and conquer Jerusalem, that they would be spared. Different things happened when Joshua came into the land. And in some way, I think there was a remnant of them that was spared, but that was the story behind them. And so they were actually the dwellers of Jerusalem before. So it's kind of interesting, because we're like, well, Nate, we're destroying Israel by fire. Like, isn't that where God's people are? Just because you're dwelling in the holy city in Jerusalem doesn't make you holy, right? And I'm sure there are true believers there, true followers of Jesus and followers of Yahweh. And just because you don't understand Messiah, it doesn't mean that you aren't a true follower of Yahweh. And I think if we follow the main commandments of love God and love your neighbor, and you're doing those things, the law and the Torah and everything else like that is less important when you're getting too legalistic with it, because the heart of the law is to love your neighbor. So there is a law, no matter how anyone else breaks it down. We all need to be following that. But even those who have midrashed and created all these traditions of men get it wrong. Even when they've been studying the Torah themselves, and someone who's never read the Torah might actually be living it out better than your most legalistic Jew. Let's see if we had any notes there. I got a note on Ekron here. And we'll see what I wrote. So all these cities are Philistine cities, perhaps showing how the cities surrounding Jerusalem will be destroyed to make way for the new Jerusalem. And it's 1,380 miles squared, wide base. The Jebusites were citizens of Jerusalem, those who dwell in the promised land, but are not covenanted people. So the remnant that remains after the destruction will join Zion. Judges 21, I'm not sure what that says. I must have read it last night when I couldn't sleep. Rabbinic literature said the Jebusites knew Abraham's descendants and would inherit the lands they promised Abraham the cave if they would not be slaughtered in that day. So pretty much everything was said there, nothing too surprising. All right. So is this just saying that all these cities are pretty close to Jerusalem along the coastline? I think Ekron is a little, 22 miles south of Jerusalem, southwest of Jerusalem. So also getting close to the Mediterranean. Let's see, we got some other notes here. So why is diet? Yeah, and that's the point we're coming back to. Why is this, the blood in their mouths, the abominations between their teeth, or whatever have you, why is that so important? And I'm going to say right now, I don't really have a great answer for you, but I dug into it a little bit, so this is what I got. So why is diet what is brought against the Philistines as their great sin? Meat with blood and unclean foods. So love God, love your neighbor. Toxicity from unclean food sheds to those around you. This is unloving to those who eat clean. Not you're clean, but eat clean. I guess I can correct that right here. Look at that. Eat clean. Jesus said it's not what goes into a man that makes him unclean, but what comes out of his mouth. So viral shedding period is increased 40% in obese adults. So we can take this two ways. I'm not going to pick on the fat people because I myself got a little extra to love. But there's probably three ways to think about this. So there's the heart of the law, which is right to, don't eat pork and don't eat this. And then a lot of your Jews are overweight and unhealthy because they're like, well, I'm eating clean, but I'm still not eating clean. They're missing the heart of the law. They're eating candy bars and all this other stuff when the whole goal was to keep yourself set apart and healthy, right? And why is that unloving to your neighbor? You're like, it's about myself. It's self-love. Well, when you don't take care of yourself, A, you can't take care of other people. And then B, other people are going to have to take care of you because disease processes are going to start taking hold in you. And also, this is something I've looked into before with COVID hit. I had a lot of continuing education. There was a guy called Dr. Seaman who was talking about, and Dr. Chestnut as well, both kind of hit on these points of the inflammation that we have with a bad diet. We pick on the obese people, but just they're this 42% prolonged period of viral shedding in obese adults because there's so much toxicity and they're so inflamed because of their poor diets. And you can be skinny fat too, so we can't make fun of just the people that are overweight, because sometimes people like me or got some extra love, but we do CrossFit, we can run around and have way more endurance than you. We just we don't look as in shape as we should be. So there's definitely skinny fat people that are very toxic as well. And the point is to be aware that you should be eating healthy and taking care of yourself so you're not toxic to other people. And it kind of makes me wonder, like, all these Philistine cities so close in proximity to Jerusalem and the inhabitants there. just sharing their diseases with them. Matthew 15, so that's where we got that, not what goes into a man, but what comes out of, not goes into a man's mouth, but what comes out of his mouth that makes him unclean. So I kind of read through the whole chapter, and funny enough, there's 3 little stories there that all pertain to food. So we got the hand washing in the first part, then we got the Canaanite woman, which kind of reminds me of the Philistines. It definitely relates to this because the Philistines essentially get wiped out, so they kind of get assimilated into either Edomia or the Galilee or the Samaritans, with the Greeks just wiping them out, and then even later being under the Seleucid reign, because Antiochus just didn't pick on the Jews; he was checking up on other people. The Samaritans were like, we're Arabs, we're Canaanites, we're not Jews, trying to escape persecution. So we have that Canaanite woman, and Jesus is like, I've only come, he's ignoring her at first. It's interesting. You're like, wait a minute, this is a strange chapter. No one really talks about why is Jesus just ignoring a woman. Before he was like all about, talking to people. The woman at the well, she's a Samaritan, and, had 5 different husbands, but, he could talk to her, but not this old Canaanite woman. He's like, I've come only for the lost sheep of Israel. And you start to read that, and you're like, man, that's crazy. That's weird. That seems out of his character than from what I'm familiar with. But she's persistent, and it shows her faith. And he says, go home, your daughter will be, I can't remember if she was sick or demon-possessed, something like that, but your daughter will be made well. So picture of maybe these Philistines, this remnant that is able to see New Jerusalem, maybe prophetically in the future, and want to join. Because it talks about nations will come and celebrate. Well, pretty much all these cities will be underneath the base of it, like destroyed, but in context, those surrounding Jerusalem, wherever it lands, because you could shift it anywhere. If it's the center, the epicenter is directly over Jerusalem, or if it's not actually the size that we get from Revelation, because we need 2 to 3 witnesses, so it's hard to say, like, did we get an accurate measurement from John? Was that recorded correctly? We need those 2 to 3 witnesses, and we don't really have those measurements anywhere else, but it's interesting to think about it. Wow, that's pretty big. It's a pretty big city coming down. It makes sense we'll need a big city if we're going to contain all the believers that ever lived. And then next in Matthew 15, we have the feeding of the 5,000. So food. I think a lot of people mix up the hand washing too that we see in Matthew 15, trying to make it about food and saying now all food is made clean. And that's even like added in some versions saying, man, that's how Jesus made all food clean. Like that doesn't say that in the original text that we have. And it's clear that the context there is hand washing. So there was a commandment, and I think we get into this a little bit about, not a commandment, but a tradition that you must wash your hands before eating. Obviously, it's probably a good idea. You should be washing your hands before you're eating, but it's not against Torah, right? So the disciples were not washing their hands to eat. Neither was Jesus, and the Jews were getting on them. And Jesus settled this thing, and then he talked to them about being unloving towards their fathers or their parents, because they had made this rule that we could give a korban offering. Korban means offering, often given to the temple instead of their family and neighbors. So it's like we have this problem today where we're like, I gave to church. And that's great, but don't neglect your family and neighbors. It's not an excuse. And I feel like we almost see that with the destruction in 70 AD, as they were so intent on the temple. And the temple system had just kind of been broken at that point. So it wasn't really even about the temple. It's what the temple stands for that's important. Because there's a heart of the temple that was missed, and they were just not loving to their neighbors. We had all these different sects just warring inside the city. If they had just united, they probably could have defeated Titus and the Romans, but they just were killing each other. The disease and the death that was rampant in that city before the destruction is, well, it's prophesied. I mean, before it happened, just how brutal it was. So I like to say rule number one is your number one. A lot of people are like, that's terrible. That's the most unloving thing I've ever heard. But that's kind of the whole narrative of the Bible, as I see it, is that you have to take care of yourself. And what do they say? I remember when I went to teen missions, they told me, you can't go into the mission field if you're in a mission field, right? So you gotta make sure that you're right with God, that you're healthy, that you're working on yourself, so you're strong, to be able to help others, so you're not shedding toxicity. Don't take care of yourself, you can't help anyone. Another interesting thought I've had, I don't know really what to think about it, but the ark, when it was captured, remember Hophnius and Phinehas, the ark was taken. I read one time that it was actually Goliath who killed Hophni and Phinehas and carried the ark on his shoulder. And it was like, well, why is he allowed to touch it? How could he touch it? I don't know. It was that other guy, what was his name? He was back in the cart, he touched it and he died. I can't remember his name. But apparently Nephilim hybrids can grab the ark. So the ark was brought to many of the cities mentioned here, these Philistine cities. As the glory of Yahweh and his garden is returned, all evil will be exposed, so light and dark clash. Believers will be as a plague to non-believers, as non-believers will be a plague to believers. And I cited 1 John 4. Did I actually? So anyone who says they love Elohim but hates his brother is a liar. So just going back to, remember that anywhere the ark went, you had like boils and rats or something. There was diseases that would come about with the ark there. So it's showing that that was the mercy seat, right? And sometimes people think the ark was actually fashioned like as kind of a throne, like a literal seat. So God's presence, dwelled there. So when we bring this holy, presence of God into this toxic environment, well, you're not going to harm God's holy presence. That's what I like to say to people. It's like when God withdrew from the temple in Ezekiel, it wasn't about like, oh, I have to withdraw because can't stand this toxicity. It's like, if I stay here, you're just going to suffer all these plagues and diseases. You will literally be vaporized. So it is a grace that he departed. So here we're seeing that he's not doing that. He's allowing the diseases to hit these cities, and they just keep passing the ark from city to city. And then eventually they just put it on a cart and they send it back to the Israelites. They're like, we don't want to deal with that. It was nice having that victory, but you can have it back. And I kind of see that the same thing here when just a believer being around a non-believer, and maybe that's somewhat getting to this idea of why these abominations and eating is so important, because it does come in line with the two greatest commandments, loving your neighbor and loving God. You love God by keeping his commandments and loving your neighbor. So I think that was a note there. Let's see, we got a final note here, because I haven't beaten that dead horse again as much as I wanted to. I'll read this. Not loving your neighbor by claiming adherence to a law is not righteousness. So that's kind of going back to the washing of the hands and then the korban offering. So we avoid our duty by citing laws and traditions of men. I know a lot of people in the Messianic community that do this. Not to point fingers, but it's, remember the heart law, loving your neighbor. It's not about like, you have to keep the Sabbath this perfectly and this way, or you're a terrible person, and then they're in the same breath they're not being loving to other people because they're like saying, well, I have to obey this law. So don't take my phrase, rule number one is your number one, and distort that here. Symptom care over addressing the root cause. I have to throw chiropractic into it. So the symptom care, and it's kind of what we talked about in Bible study a little bit. Let me just read this first. Being unloving as a congregation has led to the plagues of abortion, transgenderism, and all the things all the big ticket items that the church fights. We could try to address the symptoms, but we need to first repent of our sin and turn to Yahweh. So we got to look in the mirror. And that's the important thing. These are plagues brought on us because we as a church are not being loving like we should be. So we always blame the person who's getting the abortion, or we blame the person who is like, how could you be transgender? Or we'll blame the parent. But really, it's the community as a whole that we have to look at. Anytime someone sins in the community of believers, we can't just like condemn them. We have to look at ourselves too and be like, what have we done wrong? How have we not been loving? How have we not created the right environment? And the environment's never going to be perfect until we're back to Jerusalem, but that's no excuse from trying and striving for something better. All right, now I feel like I've thoroughly beaten that horse. We'll move on to the donkey. Now, like Balaam beating the donkey now. All right. What do we know? No. All right. I don't even think I finished reading here. All right. Let's back up a little bit. Ashkelon shall see it and be afraid, Gaza too, and shall writhe in anguish. Ekron also, because its hopes are confounded. The king shall perish from Gaza. Ashkelon shall be uninhabited. A mixed people shall dwell in Ashdod, and I will cut off the pride of Philistia, and I will take away its blood from its mouth, and its abominations between its teeth. It too shall be a remnant of our God. It shall be like a clan in Judah, and Ekron shall be like the Jebusites. Then I will encamp at my house as a guard, so that none shall march to and fro. No oppressor shall march over them, for now I see with my own eyes. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. I've said before, Zion, O daughter of Zion, I think is a picture of New Jerusalem. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you, righteous and having salvation. Is he humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim, and the war horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off, and he shall speak peace to the nations. His rule shall be from sea to sea. Sea to sea, from the river to the ends of the earth. See, it's flat. Earth has ends. As for you also, because of the covenant of my blood with you, I will set your prisoners free from the waterless pit. What is the waterless pit? I don't know if it's referring to Sheol. Interesting thought there. Return to your stronghold, O prisoners of hope. Today I declare that I will restore to you double, for I have bent Judah as my bow. I will make Ephraim its arrow. I will stir up your sons, O Zion, against your sons, O Greece. I think in other versions it said Yavan, which might not mean Greece. Could just be some of the land we already looked at, these cities, and wield you like a warrior sword. But Greece did, in fact, come and destroy, conquer this land. So very prophetic, nonetheless. I feel like I want to say something else here. The donkey is always interesting because you're like, how can you be Jewish and read this and not see Jesus riding on a donkey coming to Jerusalem? That's a tough one. It's a tough one. And a donkey. Sometimes a king would ride a donkey because, if he was riding a horse, be like, oh no, he's coming in a horse. That means he's coming to conquer us and destroy us with battle. Whereas a donkey is a picture of, you're not gonna charge the gates of the city on the donkey, right? It's a picture of peace and kind of humbling yourself. And that's how Jesus came the first time. He came humble, not as a conquering king, but as the suffering servant. Humbled himself, offered himself as a sacrifice. And then we see the war elements of Ephraim and Jerusalem be broken off. And true, after Jesus came, we had 70 AD, and then there was a couple more skirmishes. Masada and the Bar Kokhba rebellion kind of marked the end of Judea's and the Galilee's resistance to Rome after that, and they kind of switched strategies. So Zionism today, yes, there's good and bad Zionism. Zionism in the fact that you are waiting for God to return you to the land. You've actually read your Bible and you know that he will do that. Versus, we're going to go back to the land and by any means possible. So that's kind of radical Zionism, and that's kind of been the upper level of, sometimes we call them Juicifarians in our household. They're the Jews that have all these Luciferian ties and Masonic ties, and they infiltrate high levels of government and media, and they control what you think. And yes, this is kind of sounding familiar. This is bringing us to the political landscape we have today, of them gaining control. I think that's kind of happened in Nazi Germany. Hitler was actually, not that he was a good guy, but resisting this Zionistic control that was happening. Germany was not in a good place. Their people were getting slaughtered. There was no work. The Polish, the French, Austrians were just taking land from them because they had no standing army. So he brought them united. He saw that the Jews were influencing a lot of this destruction, and he made war against them. Not that it's good or bad, but in a way he was defending his people. And I think it's important to think about that before we start stamping the label of Nazi Germany on our American political landscape today, when we don't really understand what happened in Nazi Germany that led to all this. There's always two sides to every story, and that's all I'm saying. And that's all I will say. Let's keep moving on. The Lord will save his people. Then the Lord will appear over them, and his arrow will go forth like lightning. The Lord God will sound the trumpet, will march forth in the whirlwinds of the south. The Lord of hosts will protect them, and they shall devour and tread down the sling stones. And they shall drink and roar as if drunk with wine. Plenty of time. And be full like a bowl, drenched like the corners of the altar. On that day, their Lord God will save them as the flock of his people. And this is the verse I like, for like the jewels of a crown, they shall shine on his land. For how great is his goodness, and how great is his beauty. Grain shall make the young men flourish, and new wine the young women. For the New Jerusalem is pictured as golden, and the gates have all these precious jewels. So his people, his bride, the city, all these pictures we've seen in Zechariah, sitting on the land, shining for all the nations to see. I think it's a beautiful thing. Let me see if I have any notes. I know I went a little long and crazy on this one, but that's pretty much what I do anymore. Such is life. After war, peace will come to Zion. That's very deep, Nate. Daughter of Jerusalem, possible reference to New Jerusalem, as well as the believers that dwell in her. Yahweh's bride is the garden. We are the wedding guests. Yes. The garden coming back. And that looks like the end of notes there for chapter 9. And I will end it there. And you can definitely pause if you want to read these notes. I'll scroll up again a little bit so you can pause. There's a lot of good little history nuggets here. That's why I like this study. I don't want to read them all to you, but you can definitely pause and read them yourself. And I'll try not to put my face in the way like I've done in the past. I'm sorry about that. It happens. I just forget to put myself in a corner where I belong. Questions, comments? Hopefully I didn't insult the obese people. I'm sorry. Eat a carrot. Take a walk. Stop shedding toxicity. You're making other people sick. It's not just about you. Man, I'm so mean. I'm a jerk. Comes with working with people every day. It gets very frustrating. Come to foundation training class if you want to know more about taking care of your body. Because remember, rule number 1 is you're number 1. All right, time to go to church and repent of all the terrible things I've said. Shalom, everyone.